I just broke my biggest promise to myself, and that is never restart recording a podcast. And I've just done it. I think mostly because I was kind of scared recording this podcast for two reasons. Reason one is I'm doing this in English for the first time ever. I'll talk about the why behind that one in a few minutes. And the second reason is because this is something very personal that I want to talk about today. And I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to be able to tell a coherent story. But then again, this podcast is absolutely not about being coherent. So if this is the first time you've ever listened to this podcast, then what you should probably know is that this is going to be wildly unstructured, wildly unfocused as well. And I would say it's about me wandering through my thoughts and trying to explain how I create certain things within the business, but also how I feel as a leader myself. Because in the end, if you're a founder of a business, you are by definition a leader. So what I want to do with this podcast is just create a space for me to, let's say, save my thoughts or archive the path that I'm following. But it's also about trying to inspire other people on certain topics. It's about discussing my own thoughts about certain topics. But mostly, I think this podcast is something that you can use as background noise while you're doing tasks or while you're running around. So I'll try to keep it as smooth and soothing as possible. On the English. So usually I speak Dutch in all of my content, which is something that I believe in very much as well, mostly because I think being authentic is what content these days is all about. It's not about being very polished. It's not about being very AI based or something, because that's what other people are doing way too much. So I want this to be something very authentic, something very personal, something that is very me. And I think if you're doing that in your mother tongue, it's always going to be more authentic. However, on the other side, I just spent a full week in Berlin with Jonathan Courtney, which is I think my number one idol. He's an entrepreneur that has done a lot of things, but mostly focuses now on facilitation training and helping other businesses. Anyway, I was on his summer camp where we were talking about funnels, about how to market your business, how to be a promoter as a entrepreneur. And a lot of people that were at the summer camp as well were sharing their content, and most of it was in English. And I was one of the only people that had native speaking content, which meant that nobody could actually enjoy or listen or read any of the things that I created. So I decided to start experimenting with using another language, in this case English, to try and see if that works for me, because I think that's the most important part. I was struggling with, should I do it in English, should I do it in Dutch? And the most important thing for me is, do I actually enjoy it? Does it not feel like a task that I have to do? Does it feel like something that I want to do? And bringing it back to the authenticity, I think enjoying the things you create is actually, or could actually be, more important than doing it in your native language. So that's what I want to experiment with. Can I, or do I enjoy creating content or creating a podcast in a language that is different from my own? Then off to the topic of today. I told you it's going to be personal. It will be personal. I have no clue where the story is going. And I think that's also quite good. But let's see what happens. Today I want to talk about loneliness. And maybe before I dive into it, to me, loneliness is something completely different from being alone. As a person, I'm pretty good with being alone. If it's reading a book, if it's spending a whole day on my own, going to the city, drinking a coffee, or even working alone, because as a founder, you often spend a lot of time on your own. And that's something that I feel very comfortable with. However, on the other hand, loneliness to me is the lack of connecting with other people on a deeper level. And I think the first time ever where I realized that I felt lonely was about a year and a half ago. And at that time, I had just sold part of my shares in a company that I once started. I had just split ways with my co-founder at Commodore, and I had also just split up with my back then partner, like relationship-wise. So what happened is, in a very short window of time, I think it was in about 4 to 5 months, 90% of the people that I used to share my time with, all of a sudden were not there anymore. Because of course, if you have a partner, you spend time with them in the evening, during the weekend, but also during the day, connecting with them, talking about things that excite you. And all of a sudden, that was gone. And then the next thing that happened was me leaving the company that I had once started. And I think most founders, or at least most entrepreneurs would call this, I did an exit, which is of course very exciting. It was a tiny exit, however, so it was nothing very big. But also that leads to not spending time with those people anymore. And then the last part was, of course, me and my co-founder at Commodore. We spent an awful lot of time together, and also we called each other a lot during the day, during the evening, talking about ideas, talking about stuff that excited us, talking about content that we had just seen that could be an inspiration to the business. So there was a lot of time that we spent together. And if I would have to summarize that period of time, to me it meant not spending time with the people that I connected to most anymore. So all of a sudden, in this window of time, I traveled through my days on my own. And again, whereas being alone usually comforts me and I can really live with it, not connecting to people, on the other hand, that's the thing that really made me feel lonely. And now that I think of it, I think the feeling of being lonely was the first, was just the first step within this path. Because what happened was I started to notice a new feeling, something that I didn't know yet. But I couldn't really name it. I couldn't really say out loud, what is this that I'm feeling? So what I did was I started working a lot, and I started moving up the pace of the business. And that rendered me, I think, working 80 plus hours per week. I was working Monday through Friday. I was working the Saturday. I was working on a Sunday. I was just spending my time working, doing things that were good for the business, or at least what I thought was good for the business. And going through that time, I felt that this feeling, the one that I couldn't really name, the one that I couldn't really put a label on, it just got worse. It got worse and worse and worse. And I was working more, and still I felt not happy. And I think that's what really made me realize it was the lack of feeling happy, even though I was doing the right things, that got me thinking, what's actually going on here? And then I realized that my main action that I take when feeling lonely, I start doing more. And by doing more, I start doing more things on my own, and I actually disconnect even more. So this is the whole practicality thing that I do. If I feel lonely, I start doing practical things. I start taking actions that feel practical, because I believe, probably deep inside, that doing practical stuff is going to make me feel good. However, I never really realized what is this thing that is making me feel unhappy, that is making me feel this way. And let's just say there's a lot of coping mechanisms that you can follow when it comes to loneliness. And I experimented with some stuff. I would go out. So I would literally spend a whole evening or a whole night on my own in a nightclub or at a bar, because that placed me in a situation where there was a lot of other people. And even though I wasn't really connecting with these other people, I felt less on my own. And I thought that for me is step one. So during this period of time, I worked a hell of a lot of time. And also, I spent most of my free time then alone with other people, but I was still feeling very on my own. And now that I think of it, I can't really say where that really changed. I think I started working on my friendships, and I think I started connecting with the people outside of my close circle a bit more to bring them in to really get closer to myself. But what actually got me better, or what actually started making me feel better, was really going into therapy, and was, instead of pushing people away or pushing unpractical stuff away, was feeling my feelings, was sitting down and doing something very unpractical. For example, I would take my notebook and I would just start to write out my thoughts. So I would sit down 15 to 20 minutes and I would just write everything that would come up inside of my head and just write it down. And after this journaling thing that I did, I always felt less heavy. I always felt a bit more light. And during that time, I was also seeing a therapist. I was trying to feel my feelings a bit more. And I think that the main lesson that I took away from last year's period of loneliness is, instead of running away from that feeling, instead of denying it, instead of trying to run from it, is actually sitting inside of it, is sitting with that emotion, which is, for me personally, a pretty hard thing to do, because I never really connected with my feelings, let's say, up until last year. And I also needed some mechanisms to get into that feeling. Because if you're not really used to feel your feelings, you need stuff that gets you within that state of mind. I think it's the same with doing sports, for example. If you've never done sports before, then you need mechanisms to get yourself into sports. You need a subscription to a gym, for example, or you need a sports coach who can help you do more movement. And I think it's the same with feelings and with emotions. And what I think is mechanisms to get into the state of talking and feeling about your emotions is really what helped me open up to other people, but also open up to my own feelings. Because the whole I feel lonely part was something that I never dared to tell to other people, because I always felt like if I open up about my feelings, then other people think I'm crazy or that I need help. And if I need help, that means that I'm weak. And I think that is one of the main stories when it comes to me and my personal development. It's always trying to run away from the feeling of being weak, I think. Whereas now I do realize that talking about your feelings, opening up about them, and talking about the rough stuff, talking about the things that feel a bit, or that give you a bit of tension when you talk about it, those are really the moments where you grow way more than just trying to do practical stuff. So that's a bit my rant about last year. So moving from being alone into being lonely by just trying to be practical and just trying to fill the void that I was feeling from not being able to connect with other people. And then I think about a month ago, I think it's about a month ago, all of a sudden that feeling started creeping back up on me. And I felt a bit the same as I did last year, but I couldn't really name it yet again. And it was just when I started talking to a good friend of mine, I realized, hey, I'm very stressed actually. I'm doing a lot of things. I have this very rigid schedule. I wake up at 6 in the morning. I start working at 7 in the morning. I try to stop working at 4 p.m., which usually doesn't happen because then at 4 p.m. I have a lot of stuff on my plate and I want to still finish it and there's so much more to do. But then I have this hard deadline. Quit at 4. Go to the gym, work out for 2 hours, 1.5 hour, 2 hours, get back home, prepare dinner, which doesn't cost me a lot of time because I have these fitness meals that are in my freezer. And then there is free time. And I think the free time thing is something that I started paying more attention to at the beginning of this year, when I realized that I do not have any free time. So the beginning of this year, I was not doing very well on a focus level. I was waking up at 8:30. I was at the office quite late. I stopped working at 7, 8 p.m. So that meant going to the gym and then still having dinner got me home at 10, 11. So I felt like I didn't really have any time left during my day. However, if I fast forward to today, I wake up at 6, start working at 7, go to the gym at 4, I arrive back at 6. So let's say my day is done at 7 p.m., 8 p.m. And that gives me a lot of free time, but I fill that time with being practical again. And I think this is where I'm getting to the gist. If I keep doing practical stuff all the time, that renders me unconnected to other people. Because if I keep filling up my time with doing the practical stuff, then I'm just, being operational. I'm also not doing things that are really making me happy. So moving into this more practical way of doing stuff, waking up early, finishing early, creating a whole lot of free time for myself, actually kind of made me feel unwell as well, because I was constantly filling my time, and still am, filling my time with doing the practical stuff, with trying to move my business forward, with not connecting to other people. And one of the moments that made me really realize that I have this feeling of loneliness right now is also during that summer camp. When I was in Berlin, I was connecting to all of these people. And then at the end of the day, when the session was finished, everyone just went their ways. Everyone had a partner to call, a kid to look after, had a business partner that they would connect to, or would go to the bar and meet some other entrepreneurs. Whereas I just wanted to really connect. I wanted to talk about my excitement of the things that I just had done during the day. And I realized that I didn't really have anyone that I could call at that moment. I didn't really have a person that I wanted to disturb. And that's also a good thought that I just put out there, is disturbing other people. And I think that's also one of the things that people tend to do. It's, I don't want to be a burden to anyone else. So why would I call them within their free time, right? So back to this summer camp, I spent, I think, each and every evening on my own. I went for dinner, I went for a drink after, I was taking my notebook with me, I was doing very practical stuff, taking notes, maybe going to the gym even. So again, a lot of the time that I was on my own, I was doing the more practical stuff. And again, this wouldn't allow me to connect with other people because I was constantly up in my own head and not really feeling my feelings, but just doing stuff that would help me later on. Whereas now I realize, and it's quite tough that I have to realize this year after year after year, I now realize that doing less practical stuff actually makes me feel less lonely as well. And one of these things is, for example, just talking to my best friend, picking up my phone, calling her up, talking about my day, not having it to be the best delivery of a story ever, but just having a small interaction with another human being of about 10 to 15 minutes at least. That is something that can really lighten your mood. And that is something that really gets me out of my head as well. Because what happens during these practical moments is you get up in your own head and you start putting deadlines and you start creating more and more and more work. Whereas connecting with another person is just offloading a part of what you've just set up in your own brain. And I'm absolutely not sure where all of this is leading, but I think, to me, feeling less lonely or trying to feel less lonely, moving away from that loneliness, comes down to two things. It's connecting with other people on a deeper level. So that means also opening up. That means also talking about the rough stuff that is going on, talking about the things that are going on inside of your head. And then on the other hand, it's doing the less practical stuff and also allowing myself to do less practical stuff. And less practical stuff is, again, it's something layered. You have practical stuff in a business, and then you have practical stuff on a personal level. And this is a bit the hamster wheel that I got myself into. If I wasn't doing practical stuff on a business level, I was doing practical stuff on a personal level, like doing the dishes or filling up the washing machine, stuff like that. And these two would just get very intertwined because if I wasn't doing one, I was doing the other. And I could never really allow myself to do nothing, do impractical shit. Taking my notebook and starting to write down how do I actually feel and what made me feel this way, and can I do something with it, or is it just enough to write it down? So to me, it really is about hacking myself into getting more impractical. And I did do something last week. I think it's been over 12 years since I ever gamed and spent time while playing a game, because I always had this judgment over people that play games. I always thought this is a waste of time. You're wasting away hours that you can spend on your business or that you can spend in the gym, or people that game have bad habits because they're always sitting down and they're not moving. Whereas on the other hand, if I'm playing a game, I'm only doing that because you're so deep into it. For example, when I'm watching something on Netflix, for example, I'm always double screening, and that's a very bad habit that I have over there. However, now that I notice myself calling it a bad habit, that's very judgy as well. But I double screen a lot, which means that I'm never really shutting down my brain. I'm always doing two things at the same time. Whereas if I'm playing a game, I'm only doing that because it has me watch, it has me listen, it has me take actions with this controller type thing. So last week I decided I'm just going to spend money on forcing myself into being more impractical. So what I did was I bought a projector and a PlayStation, and I really murdered my saving accounts while doing this. And I bought these two things. I integrated them in my living space so that they wouldn't bother me, because I really like a clean living space. And just by spending money on something, I realized that you want it more in a way. It's for example, it's the same with running. If you have to force yourself to run each and every day, what makes it more attractive to do it is buying a pair of nice running shoes. Because now all of a sudden you're excited to do this thing. And it's the same in business, by the way. But what I did was I bought something so that I would be excited to do it. I bought something just for me to enjoy, for me to have this time, and then to do something very impractical. And I was a bit hesitant to actually really get into this idea because I thought, playing a game is not very social as well. So how is that not rendering you even more lonely? But then again, loneliness is not the same as being alone. So doing this very impractical thing that is gaming actually allowed me to calm down, to have a moment in which only I could do impractical stuff, a moment in which I really didn't have to do anything practical or be very present or be very stressed about a new little task. So that's something that really helped me, is doing less practical stuff. And now comes the clue, I think. Planning impractical time within your schedule actually helps you being more practical in the time that you have to be more practical. And then this connects to the loneliness thing as well. Because if I spend less practical time, at least, I know that there's still a baseline of practical things that you have to do, of course, but if you spend less practical time, then you might actually enjoy, first of all, the impractical time, but also the practical time that you have after that. And this is just one of two things that I'm doing now, is just trying to be a bit more impractical. And then on the other hand, it's connecting to people. So what I did was I built this amazing schedule to be very practical, to be very structured, to be everything that I can be, with all of the expectations that I set for myself. But having that murdering schedule disallowed me to connect with other people because they were in a second place. They came the second spot. They were not my first priority. My first priority was I have to be practical. I have to be running my business. And then by filling your calendar with business first and not paying attention to connecting with other people, you end up at the end of the day not having made any plan or not having contacted anyone. So one of the things that I haven't done yet, but that I am going to start doing, is not just building impractical time within my schedule, but also connecting time. And connecting time, to me, as I say it out loud right now, means two things. It means, on one hand, connecting to the people that I love, because there's a lot of people, and I have a very big heart. There's a lot of people that I love, a lot of people that I love spending time with. I want to connect with those people, actually. So I want to make space for those moments within my calendar and make sure that they don't happen on a random, but they happen because I want them to happen. I think that's one part of the connecting. It's with other people, and it's by allowing myself to just be there. If I'm having a rough day, if I'm having a off day, then it's also fine to have that moment. I don't need to shield myself from feeling off with other people. So connecting with other people, and then also connecting to myself. And I think that's what a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of professionals in general forget doing, is taking the time to sit still, to feel your emotions, to even write about your emotions, but just making this little sacred space for yourself that you can use to feel what is there to be felt. And here's a little story of a person that I was talking to last week. He's an entrepreneur, and he's really hustling right now. And he's doing a lot of the stuff that he has to do, but he never feels what is there to feel. which means that he's moving at such a lightning fast pace that he always forgets to realize, what am I doing and how am I feeling with that? Because he's constantly doing, as I was, these practical things, disallowing him to feel what's actually going on. And it's funny that I told this person, this friend of mine, this entrepreneur, I told him, yo, how about you make a space, a plan, a timing for you to just sit down and not even trying to figure out anything, but just let it ooze over you. Let those feelings come in. Let yourself realize, what am I actually feeling and how am I feeling with that? And where is that feeling that I'm feeling right now? And I think a lot of the people that I meet try to exclamate how good things are going, how well they're feeling at times, how good of a business they're running, but they're not exclamating the moments where they feel off or when they feel a little less good. The thing is, if we don't exclamate, if we don't put the moments out there in which we don't feel 100%, then we're not going to feel the moments where we do feel 100% as well as we would. So, putting everything together, I think loneliness to me comes from trying to live a very practical life. It comes from me dealing with ADHD, dealing with businesses that have to be run, with growth that has to be made, with a lot of stuff that I know I can only do if I'm very practical. However, if I move too much in being this very practical thing, then I also get very severe with myself. I get very judgy and I disallow myself doing impractical stuff. So the more practical things I like to do, the less impractical I get. And the less impractical I get, the more lonely I start feeling. Because when you're feeling lonely, it's usually, or at least for me, it's not voicing or not being able to voice my feelings or my thoughts. And in the end, that's the thing that really renders you lonely. So if there should be a lesson in this podcast, I would say, first of all, to me, and this really is a message to myself, take time to feel what you're feeling, because that shows you how it's going. And while taking that time to actually feel, try to incorporate less practical stuff in your life. And by being less practical, I'm quite sure you'll be able to connect with other people a bit better. And here comes a little meta moment. I know, or at least I felt during recording this podcast, that at a certain stage I was feeling lost within the story that I was telling. However, I think at the end, I tried to, get it back together in a little lesson. And I think in the end, that's basically what, for me at least, this podcast is all about. It's just wandering inside of my mind and wandering inside of the things that I'm feeling and I'm doing. And at the end, you'll always find something. You'll always find a little lesson. You'll always find a little thing that's going on. And what I'm doing right now, by the way, this technique of just talking about what you're feeling and what you're thinking is what they call chair work. And this chair work is something very impractical, but also something that really allows you to connect with your feelings and to exclamate thoughts that you're having instead of letting your brain race through them. So yeah, if you're feeling lonely, hit me up and let's do impractical stuff together.